Tonushree, just want to say welcome. And why don't you tell us about your journey in talent management, HR? You run a very successful consulting firm based out of Philly.
I've been running my own consulting business for the last 10 years out of Philadelphia, but my journey actually started in HR back in India. So after I passed out of business school, I spent 15 years in consulting with a big consulting firm, Mercer. So 5 years in Asia, based out of India, moved here and then was here for 10 years, pretty much in this whole space of talent and culture and leadership. So when I left Mercer, I was leading the North American practice, doing a leadership role as well as um, consulting to clients and getting a variety of experiences, but also hitting my 15-year mark. So decided to go in-house to Hudson's Bay, where you have Saks, Lord and Taylor in retail, and was there for about a year as the head of talent management before I started my own practice. So the last 10 years has been an entrepreneurial journey and all in the area of strategic talent management.
Your article in Forbes, which sort of initially just made me reach out to you and said, wow, I just have to have this person on my show. Tell us about that article. And of course, I'm going to put the link to the article in my notes. So just tell us about the article.
The article this time that I wrote on Forbes was around the talent pyramid and internal talent pipelines. Talent shape, and normally organizations are pyramid shaped for the most part. But often what happens is with generational pressure, grade creep, people want promotions all the time. Before you know it, the talent shape, instead of being a pyramid, can often become an inverted pyramid. So, how to manage the talent shape in a way that is more strategic, balanced against costs, and not just willy nilly promoting people so that you're trying to retain them, but it's becoming an inverted pyramid. So, along with talent shape, I also talk about talent velocity and composition of that internal pipeline. So, managing that velocity becomes a very critical part of this journey because, like, organizations tend to hire at senior levels when they're in a growth phase, then or they hire at mid-level and want to promote people quickly because people generationally today are asking for promotions more frequently. And in order not to lose this talent, they tend to make that upward velocity a lot faster. And as a result, this instead of managing the velocity of the inflow, the upward flow, and the outflow the way they want, they become more reactive in nature. So, what I talk about is how to be much more proactive about managing that talent velocity so that the shape of the pyramid remains what they want it to be rather than inadvertently becoming a higher cost inverted pyramid. And the final thing I talk about there is talent composition, which goes to say, what is that pipeline made of? Is it made of the right attributes and the right kind of high potential talent that you want? Is it made of the right kind of composition from the different metrics of gender, ethnicity, or generation that you actually want? So it all goes to say that organizations need to look at it more strategically, analyze their data, and then take it to where they want to go.
You've seen that happen in so many organizations that you start off with a pyramid shaped few people at the top, larger number in the middle, and the bulk of your organization is at the entry level. Now, what's also happening is fewer organizations, are able to manage this kind of a movement and retain the pyramid after a couple of years. So you typically see, because of promotions, because of many other reasons, you find more people at the top. So therefore, they are blocking the pathway to the for the others who are coming below them. Two, it also sort of results in a higher cost organization, and therefore a talent pyramid actually may result in your business going out of business.
Absolutely. In fact, I use the example of a Christmas tree from a case study I had a long time back. So this was an organization which would keep promoting people. And then every few years, when they would have a bad year, they would say, we've got to reduce headcount. What would happen is they would then tell the leaders, the directors, the managers to reduce the headcount. And at every level, what they landed up doing is taking the lowest common denominator of the most inexperienced talent at that level and taking them out. So before you knew it, the shape of the organization became that of a Christmas tree because you had people at lower levels, and then the jump to the next higher level was much more significant and too big, so they couldn't make that jump. And then they would basically complain there weren't career opportunities. Or you had situations where suddenly you had an influx of VPs because everybody wants to become a VP. Good times turn to bad. Now let's go in for a headcount reduction. And then all these organizations do a lot of rifts. So yes, it results in rifts in a bad time, reduction in force, and it results in getting themselves out of the market before they know it.
When you say the organizations need to focus on talent management, what are some of the ways in which they can show that they have the focus?
Always, most organizations land up doing a great job managing money, but not people. And the reason, if one were to just think about what some of the reasons are, it's tangible, the ROI is visible, people have been dealing with money all the time. But when it comes to people, it's equally important. It's equally strategic, but because it's a little more fuzzy, the ROI is not clear, it's not tangible, the focus isn't necessarily.
A lot of great talent management happen in the consumer products field, but that could be based on the visibility I had at that point of time to the practices. But if I think about my own experiences of great talent management, it's happened largely in all the CPG firms that I've been a part of, but also in some of the other firms that I've seen among my clients. So I've seen smaller firms, mid-sized firms also do a great job of talent management. But a lot of it has to depend on the senior leaders. I think if the CEO understands that this is a strategic lever that they can put in, then I think it changes the way that talent management gets addressed. So then they are far more deliberate about how they make the choices. What have you seen?
Yeah, I would agree within the realm of corporate, definitely CPGs ahead. But when I pose this question, I actually like to take it a little beyond that box and look at the sports industry. And the reason I say the sports industry is because it is so much more dependent on strategic talent management in the moment and visible. So if you think of, a typical sports team, let's take the US right now, right? So all these team-based sports teams that you have two different roles. One is that of a coach, and you have one of a general manager. And we use this in some of the work we do as well. The job of a coach is really to get the best out of a player on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
And they're always focusing on what's best for them and helping them, etc., and working on their strengths and weaknesses. The job of a general manager is to build a roster. He or she is building a legacy. And in doing so, they're looking a much longer term out, scouting the best talent, always making sure the entire roster in every set of players is extremely rich, which basically means a lot of players are just dipping from their game, have a very short lifespan. They're basically, if they're not at the best of the best of the best in that team, they're out. The next season, they're out. And that is the example of strategic talent management, is to think longer term, to think ROI, and to build a legacy, a roster of talent. So now if you take it down to organizations and say, how can organizations do that so that they're building the best overall pool of talent with everybody in it who is exceptional? Of course, everybody won't be exceptional, but attempting to do that. Therefore, being more strict with underperformers, going all the way out, very actively going and attracting the right kind of talent. You look at baseball, Japan. You look at so they're looking for talent always on a longer term basis. They're making sure the current set of players are taken care of, and they're very, very strict. So the overall roster has to be rich. It has to be a longer term plan, and it has to therefore also be strict on performance standards. That is attraction, retention, and talent development at its best. But we often fail to take it to that level within corporations because we're a little more careful around people, or a little more hesitant sometimes to take risks with high potentials as you need to, or a little more hesitant to take underperformers out of the door. But if we began to move a little, or begin to think more and more like that, then it converts all the people leaders to be more like these general managers on sports teams.
So I think that's a terrific way to visualize it. And yes, I mean, sports, or for that matter, even some of the other industries you talk about, movies. One of the things, of course, it's a lot of people talk about talent management in the world of cinema, except for the fact that I think it's not a like-to-like comparison, because movies success of a great actor depends on multiple factors. There's the whole thing of the storyline, there's the music, the lights, the kind of story, and the acceptance of the audience of that kind of a story. And so there are many other factors, but sports very purely is a talent based kind of a industry. And so if you look at the Indian cricket team, if they are able to sort of get the best players and have that happen, then that shift results in them winning more. It's pretty straightforward and it's quite visible. Also, interestingly, when you think about the role of the leader, the captain of the cricket team versus, let's say, the coach of the cricket team. Um, to your analogy, they do two different things. I mean, there's somebody who's doing more of a day-to-day kind of a work, almost like the chief operating officer for talent.
Correct.
And there's another person who's sort of looking at the more long-term piece, looking and making sure that the roster is always there are enough people at every stage. You're not going to a critical set of matches with just one person you are depending on. You've got a set of options. So yes, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. But isn't talent management inherently then going against this whole thing of equity, that everybody gets the equal chance? And is talent management essentially against that whole mindset?
That argument is definitely out there, and there are always debates about this. But at the end of the day, there is data to say that your top 10% of your performers are delivering a lot more value
How
than
much
your
more?
solid man. They say 20% more value, or, instead of 100, they're basically giving you 120%, right? So if they're giving more value, and at the end of the day, there's also the argument, you need the Bs, you need the solid Bs. But the question becomes, why is anybody tolerating the Cs, the C players? And if you begin to slowly, convert this more and more, so your Bs get upgraded, or you bring in more As, you reduce the number of Cs, your overall output and performance is always, as an organization, going up. So not only that, when there is overall mediocrity, high performers feel disillusioned, and they don't want to necessarily pull their weight at once. You want to belong to a high performing team. So when you see that everybody's treated too equally and that extra effort isn't recognized, then you actually suboptimize what that person is also capable of delivering. So keeping that in mind, equity is important when you're looking at opportunity, but opportunity for what? Like, let's say, is it that a job opens up and you threw it open to everybody in an equal forum, and then the best person within the organization got the job, and that is also being equitable. But I think at the end of the year, when you look at performance and you look at your leadership development programs, and you say, well, now we're going to base it, spread it like butter across everybody equally, that isn't necessarily getting you, again, your best ROI. Your best ROI is having the right kind of key or rotational moves for high potentials, because of course, there's all these statistics around talent hoarding. Managers don't like to let go of their talent. But if you're holding on to a high potential and not rounding out that person's experiences across a multitude of things, which positions them better as a leader, they will sometime get frustrated in this role and maybe leave and go to another organization. So you are better off identifying those high potentials, strategically moving them around to critical roles, getting them the right portfolio of experiences they need, so that A, it's better for the individual, better for the organization. B, you're building future leaders, and C, you don't have to sit and worry that the person's leaving the organization. So that is strategically investing in those people and getting them the right moves. We actually use a simulation game called Talent Chess, and it actually helps leaders understand the value of doing that, taking a high potential and taking them to these different kinds of roles to round out those experiences. And that is important for the individual and the organization, because you need to look at the whole team and the whole organization as that chessboard.
Someone had once explained this whole business of having A players, and I was asking the same question that
Hmm.
organizations can have multiple kinds of capabilities.
Mhm.
So, you know, when you are focused only on the high potential people, are you sort of ignoring the rest? And the person in turn, was somebody who I really look up to, actually explained it in a beautiful example and said that imagine you are going to lift a very heavy table and you've
Hmm.
got 7 or 8 people, who are going to be able to lift that table with you. And you sort of, as you start to pick it up, you realize that the other 6 people, are fairly weak, and therefore, yes, they are trying their best, but they are just not going to be able to lift the table.
Mhm.
So he was saying that think about the business as lifting the table from one place to the other. And if only one person is doing it, at some point of time, the person is going to get tired and say, listen, I can't work in this team because I'm the only one who's doing all the heavy lifting,
Right.
literally. And then you lose everybody else. And the others don't have a place to go because in any place that you go to, if they are expected to lift a heavy table, then they are not cut out for this particular role anyway.
Yeah.
So,
That's a great example, actually. Yeah, that's what high potentials are.
let me double down and understand this whole notion of high potential and high performance.
Mhm.
Uh, is everybody who's a high performer a high potential person? Is that the way to think about it?
No, I would say potential is the maximum that a person is capable of, and performance is kind of a subset of that, right? So an individual may have a lot of potential, but is, let's say, early in their career, early in their role, and not yet living up to their potential. But they have a lot of room to grow into that potential and therefore perform at their very best. On the other hand, you may have, again, what is a high performer is basically someone who's delivering their performance today. So you're looking back at the last year and said, he or she did well against this last year's performance. Or you look at the track record and say, he or she did well the last 2, 3 years. That person is a high performer. But a high performer may already be tapped out in that role and have no additional potential. So there could be high performers with more potential. There could be high performers with limited potential, and there could be high performers who are tapped out. The best value is to basically look for those who have more potential, identify who has more potential, and beginning to work on that kind of as the room to grow for this person, and work towards those people. That's why the investment is better done. When I say investment, the talent investment is better done with those who have a lot more room to grow against their overall potential. Now, that's the harder part to gauge and judge, because when you ask a manager, 9 out of 10 times they're looking at the high performers and saying they're high potentials.
Exactly. Also because it's easy to say that here is a person who's sold 50, everybody else has sold 40, so this person is high performer. Yes, but chances are that your manager is going to say this person has great potential, therefore is able to deliver the 10 extra. But potential is completely different. Potential The way I think about it is potential is also the ability to do a completely different job. For example, you could have a great high performer as an
Mhm.
individual contributor who may or may not become a great people manager. That's a very different role. And the person has the ability to manage, let's say, a team of 5 people. Somebody else may have a ability to manage, a geographically spread out team of 20 people. So there are different measures that we can look at. So
Mhm.
when you think about potential and identifying that, and that's really, to me, the mystery element that I want to talk about more today. So, um, do people get to know it themselves that I'm a high potential person, or is potential, really based on the context? So if I'm in organization A, I might be looked at as average, and in another organization, I might be the top performer. So does
Mhm.
it depend on me? Does it depend on the other people?
First of all, potential by definition is involving the future state, right? So we are definitely not just looking at the past, we are focusing fundamentally on the future state. But the question is potential for what?
Hmm.
Is it potential to take on more responsibilities? Is it potential to significantly switch and take on a completely different role? Is it potential to move sideways? And often, in not clarifying what the organization means from a potential standpoint, is where lies the problem. So now let's say the normal definition is potential for bigger, better roles, right? And the example you used is the classic one to point out where things can go wrong. Too often we run into great technical software engineers. They're becoming a technical lead, and now you want to reward them and you want to hold on to them. So the leaders decide that the only way up is to move them into a managerial role because that takes you up multiple levels and to senior director roles or beyond. And maybe the individual has no inclination, no capability, no interest in becoming a people manager. And more often than not, they make these wrong moves because they're chasing that title. So I think first, the organization needs to clarify what they mean by potential. Two, through the talent review processes, which happen in a lot of organizations, identify who these people are, who are kind of above the rest, and then what they're doing about it. So spend less time on these talent reviews on just precision finding which box they are going into. That's less relevant. But more, once you know who the bunch of high potentials are, what are you going to do for their development? Now, in doing that, let's say they decide the right kinds of moves for these high potentials, which may or may not involve coaching or a move or some kind of mentoring, whatever the case may be. Then the question becomes, do they go back and tell the individual? And organizations have different philosophies on this. Some believe in total transparency at the cost of upsetting all the others who are the non-hypos. Some believe in just tapping them on the shoulder and saying, well, you're being looked into and you're considered high potential, and they don't send such messages to the others. But at the end of the day, if you go back to the individual, a true high potential has hunger to learn. Hunger is one of the most important things. They have natural curiosity, they have natural agility, they have a desire to take on more, and they're able to. So they're agile, they're able to learn quickly, they're able to move on, and they're kind of propelled from within. And I think a true high potential doesn't need to be told, hey, we consider you a high potential. They will find their own way. So, and even if they're not necessarily tapped on the shoulder, they will be doing some learning on the side. They will be finding new opportunities. And that's why I go back to um, the hunger to learn, which sometimes is kind of equated with ambition, but I don't like the word ambition because ambition is also chasing titles, right? So ambition is hunger to take on more responsibilities, to learn new things, and to keep growing. Agility is the ability to do that. And I think, therefore, the true high potential, whether they're told or not, knows that and will follow their own journey.
So what you are really saying is it's a combination of the person's ability to dig deeper into what they're doing. It's also
Mhm.
the ability to understand sideways that, here are the adjacencies that I should be looking at. And they are naturally curious. They'll sort of figure out ways to learn that, either through a project, or they'll talk to people, or they'll read about it and they'll build that. And also, in some cases, the ability to take on more complex tasks. So sometimes, uh, the ability to take on more variables in the task, that you have more people, it's a tough market, it's a competitive thing. We don't have price flexibility. We have this, so multiple constraints, and yet they are able to take that on and deliver. So,
Correct.
would a high potential person, when you try them on in a new role in year one, would they be really outperforming others in terms of, so we said performance and potential are two different things. Assuming you've put somebody into a fairly challenging next role, would it mean that even in the first year they are able to actually deliver, the performance measures really exceed that?
Not necessarily, very rarely, in fact. In fact, back on that earlier one, the analogy I use when I do work around the career architecture design is that of a rock climbing wall. So we don't call it career ladders anymore. We call it a rock climbing wall, because what we do is we go and put in place these handholds and footholds. And we're telling the employee, it is your journey. Look up at this rock climbing wall, see which way you want to navigate, left, right, zigzag, and the degree of risk you're willing to take, because it involves taking a bit of risk, stretching out, and going in a different direction. So if I continue with that analogy to answer your second question, your arms really hurt, right? And what you do is, at that moment when you've got to that new spot, you wait. You assess the situation. You wait for that pain to subside before you figure out, okay, now where's the next space I'm going to be? So that is what happens when a person is in a new role. They are getting used to it. That pain is working through the system. They're learning, they're making mistakes, but that is part of the game. And maybe a really great person would land up delivering at a medium level. The rarest of the rare would knock the ball out of the park, but some may not. I think the important thing is, what is that tolerance for failure at that point? Because the individual needs to understand that now suddenly they didn't go from becoming a star to a underperformer. The organization needs to provide them the support to be successful in a new role, which is again often where the breakdown happens. And then what is that tolerance limit? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? When they're going to allow this person to try and deliver. Now, if that becomes 5, 6 years and the person's still on a downward trajectory, maybe that stretch was too much. Maybe they're in the wrong role. But somewhere it's a it's a decision along with the manager at that point to really think through and make this person successful, because you don't want that level of stretch to kind of derail someone who is otherwise on a successful path.
And that often is, that's another very common mistake that individuals make. I mean, they kind of, think that, okay, I should be able to do this. They really stretch themselves such that they're barely getting their toehold into the next role. And, and therefore, when they find that they are not able to really, be the superstar in that category. In the
Mm.
example I would often use is, in boxing, it's like your weight. You change your weight category. Maybe you're the, lowest weight in the next category, and therefore you're getting hit a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, to sort of really say that at what stage do you take the next stretch, how much time do you need to train differently? So I like that picture that as people get into new roles, you are really trying to give them opportunities to have, a very different set of, toe holds and, places where they can rest a little bit and just build a new network. So it's
Mm-hmm.
all that that comes through. So when organizations have to look for high potential people. Uh, you talked about, their curiosity, ambition, and all of those things, the combinations. But how should they? What is the process of identifying high potentials? Does every manager find some of the people in their team? At which stage do you moderate it? Because you might suddenly have a scenario where the organization leaders come together and say, "Well, how come we've got 7 people from finance and only 3 from marketing?" So, how do you sort of handle a situation like that?
Yeah, this is important because both guidance, guardrails, and calibration is the way I would put it. So, what happens when an organization's never done a talent review process? Now, bear in mind, talent review is a process. Whenever I'm using that phrase, I'm separating it from a performance review process, right? A performance review is an end of the year compensation distribution mechanism for the year's performance. Whereas a talent review, let's say is a springtime or a summertime exercise to truly identify these high potentials. And if an organization's never done it, then you basically start at the executive level and then work your way down. And when I say, so let's say an organization's been doing it for a few years, they work their way down to 2, 3 levels, then it's happening at a departmental level. When it's happening at a departmental level, and HR again plays a key role, both as a process facilitator and a process designer, right? So typically the talent management team would have set in place some process parameters forms they need to fill out, criteria they need to look at. And I won't say a strict percentage, but some loose guidelines of this is what we expect as your high potential numbers given the size of your department. And the HR business partners, who should by now have become more and more strategic talent partners, play the role of facilitating it within those departments so that a good conversation is held. Say, take finance as an example. You're working through finance, the managers are there, they're talking so that the standard of who a high potential is done through a process of calibration. Otherwise, I'm Joe's manager, I think Joe's excellent, and there's Mary's manager, and Mary's manager has 5 high potentials. As we are talking, we realize we may not be talking to the same standards. So the departmental calibration helps people settle kind of their own judgment of who a high potential is. And if when done well with the guidelines and with HR facilitating and managers all weighing in, it gets corrected. So now when you start rolling it back up to the executive level meeting, then you're getting the cross-functional calibration right again. Again, I would keep saying it is not marching to a number, but the way in which you are providing evidence on a Jack or a Mary or a Joe and saying, this person is a high potential because of XYZ reason. And in that calibration session, because people challenge it, offer their own contribution, the definition of who a high potential gets corrected and the numbers get corrected. So over the years, as they're doing it more and more, it works itself out. So the rules are there, the process needs to be there, but the calibration and conversation is key. And then the roll up.
Usually, do you see a percentage of employees in a department that can be termed as high potential, or do you see a larger possibility that you are looking at a high potential percentage, across an organization or geography? What is the right way to frame it?
When we do it, we have done it a lot of times, and you invariably give them a rule of we expect your high potential percentage to be X, then the solids to be Y, and this to be Z. And you go into finance, you go into strategy, you go into the different groups. First cut, everybody's a high potential. They're way above board. And so we have to keep saying, so we show the data. And so when I facilitate, I show the data. I say, your quota was this, and look, you're like way off. So it works itself down from there. But again, it's a percentage of the population, so that the smaller teams should have lesser number. And then when you roll it all back, the percentage is therefore the same across for the organization, but it's worked out of those micro calibrations working themselves up. Now, I have never taken that entire Jack Welch kind of approach to say it has to be precision percentage. It's a guideline, and as long as everybody's not a high potential, they've done a good job.
And therefore, give me some kind of a number that is it like 5%, 1%, 20%? What's the number of high potential people on an average in a talent pool?
It varies company to company, but I like to keep it to 10% at the high potential level because again, it's it's truly your A++ player that you're looking at. Everybody's good. Like if they're not good,
They shouldn't have been hired.
they shouldn't be there. What you're trying to say is back to the question of who's got that ramp up space the most? Who are you going to invest in talent? Which is different from a performance calibration at the end year, which is about distribution of performance bonuses. So everybody who did well that year deserves their bonus in a certain way. But everybody we're looking for in a talent review is who has got the maximum room to grow. Therefore, we are going to invest disproportionately in talent. So we also have situations where there are a lot of high performers in steady, what I call steady Eddie jobs, and have no potential to move somewhere else, no desire to move. Let's take a simple example. Let's take a high performing payroll expert who is not wanting to go anywhere else, has no skills in going anywhere else. That person's a high performer in their role, but they're not in the high potential box. So sometimes we have it takes a lot of work to get managers to understand that, because you're suddenly, saying that it's almost gets equated as the performance rating and saying, well, are you saying this person's not that because they're delivering great numbers? Well, they're delivering great numbers in their current role the way they should. But is this person going to be the next head of HR? No. Or the next head of finance? No, because they're not willing to branch out and do anything else or gain different skills. So helping them understand that difference becomes critical to truly understanding who high potential is.
So when you are looking at high potential, is there an implicit belief that high performance is a necessary but not sufficient condition? Would you say that? Or can somebody have a um, sort of average performance and still have high potential?
There can be instances, and it's interesting to dive a little deeper and understand the context. So there could be a situation where the person's in a wrong role. So they have a lot of potential, but in their current role, they're not performing well. It could be, we've seen situations of that of, let's say someone came back from maternity leave and has been out of the workforce for a period of time. Again, high potential, not ramped back to their performance space. So while I wouldn't say there should be many of those, there can be instances, but there's a context to those, and it's important to understand the context, especially that first example I gave you. If the person has a high potential and is underperforming because they're in a wrong role, the organization needs to do something quickly. Otherwise, they're possibly going to lose a star player to
Right.
somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. When you are looking at hiring people, is it possible to identify high potential people at the time of when they are being hired? Is that doable?
It's possible. I think not enough effort is put into it. But if I go back to some of these criteria, of course, you look at the track record, the capabilities, the skills they've gained, the experience they've gained. But if you're not also looking for the trajectory of their movement and the reasons why, right? So if you see someone who's made a lot of moves, One conclusion could be they're a high potential and they're moving. The other conclusion I could also draw is they're title hungry and they're jumping jobs for titles, right? So I think what they've done in these different critical moves and why they did it is an important determinant to try to understand. Like, did they do it because they truly felt they were going to gain certain experiences and it truly positioned them better and better because they were successful in their previous role, had a track record, moved on to a different role, had a track record, is a different person from somebody who is positioning things in order to jump for titles. So I think it's a little more nuanced and subtle. Like, you can't just throw it into a interview guide and expect everybody to do that selection well. Where I think it's important is to spend more time trying to find that. Kind of back to my general manager example, not just the person who's hitting the ball out of the park today. Moneyball is a great example. When you look at that movie and you look at how he was looking at the statistics, it's basically, are you looking for people who have the maximum ability to grow?
When you look at Moneyball as a movie and with the lens of talent management, it's a very powerful, story which tells you exactly how data can be used to look at talent management. So that's absolutely a fantastic example of that, because analytics can actually give you great insight in terms of your talent profile. So what kind of work have they done? What kind of and if you look at the circumstances in which they delivered something, I mean, so the more richer the contextual data you have, the better is the understanding you have of your talent profile. So um, and sports is one terrific place where they use a lot of it. So
Correct.
they almost, now you can put this person almost ball by ball in the fourth ball every time they have done this, and therefore you have to watch out and coach the person not to let loose in the fourth ball. It's almost as precise as that. When you think about telling somebody who's a high potential, and you did briefly touch upon that scenario where you tell somebody that, okay, Tanushree, you're a high potential person in our assessment, and um, does it sort of make the person complacent, and B, if this person goes and tells their peers that, hey, listen, I had this conversation with my manager, I was told I'm one of the high potential people, I'm getting a better stock grant, is that a good idea to do? Is that not a good idea, or does it vary? What's your advice?
I think it's back to organizational culture and maturity in doing this, but talking through if they want to do it and why they want to do it, right? Because high potential arrogance is a real thing. One of the biggest reasons why high potentials get derailed is because they get anointed. And once they get anointed, the high potential arrogance can continue to build in. And therefore, high potentials are not high potentials forever. You have to keep looking to see, are they continuing to demonstrate the impact and the behaviors you want out of high potentials. So there are organizations, there are banks where they've been doing it for a long time, and they actually, everybody knows I'm a so and so box in the box, right? And the other person knows which box they're on. That is full transparency. I'm not in favor of full transparency of everybody knowing which box they're on, kind of like a disc profile, I'm a D or an S. Ensuring there is enough humility as an expectation is key. So a high potential, I feel, needs to know they're looked at favorably without necessarily a label. So if they say, we believe you have great potential to take on more responsibilities and we're thinking about your career in these ways, is this something you're interested in? And talking to them about their own skills, their own aspirations. And then let's say I worked with a global company once where they had their high potential, the people we chose were going to be their future business leaders, which would involve moving countries with their families. So we had them scripted it out so they spoke to them and people understood the choices they had to make personally and professionally. Now, what is very important though, I feel, is to have a mentor alongside so that they're just not off running in the wild without this keeping them grounded a little bit so that the struggles they're able to work through, the coaching they need, they get, and the arrogance is not coming in. Now, the others becomes a whole different question, right? There's a lot out there where the others, once they get the whiff that they are not the high potentials, because word has a way of leaking out,
Mhm.
they do get upset. Now, there's a lot of that. Now, and there should be some kind of development. But to your earlier example, if they're not going to be the ones lifting the table, they're not lifting the table. So it is something to live with and manage for by managers, but not to such an extent that you're creating haves versus have nots. And now you have a very upset population. So, bottom line is, it needs to be dealt with sensitively. And this communication of level of transparency needs to be an executive level decision before the program is actually done.
And when you do identify high performers and high potential people, um, what I also picked up is it needs to be done at different times. I mean, don't do both of them together because chances are that one is going to impact the other. So
Mhm.
you've just finished your performance rating, so there's every tendency that the star performer is automatically sort of, without much debate, put in because everybody's in awe of the performance, and you miss the conversation about potential. So that's one. Do you suggest that the high potential people identified and the high performers get equal kinds of, let's say the top performer and the top potential person both get the same kind of rewards? I mean, so is, let's say, the stock grant or the increments and, all of that. Is that something that should also go along with this identification?
Yeah. So the way I have seen it work best is, again, I'll go back to the performance conversation is about a current year's performance for the purpose of distributing short-term incentive. So your bonus gets distributed on the basis of your last year's performance based on what your bonus was supposed to be. When it comes to the long-term incentive potential, you're looking at the track record of performance, so not 1 year, you're looking at track record of performance. If you're using a 9 box, that's typically the x-axis, y is the 9 box potential. Those people in the top right-hand side are often given preferential additional long-term incentives as well. So you use the long-term incentives more for your higher potentials, as long as your reward systems are well worked through with this. And again, it's more, is it a one time? Is it a consistent? Back to my a high potential is not a high potential forever. It should be more strategically given as options for high potentials. The short term incentive should be is for everybody based on their last year, current year's performance.
So this year's rewards and recognition is for this year's performance. The rewards for high potential people is obviously stretched towards the longer term. So your rewards also sort of fructify in the longer term rather than in the immediate term. One other sort of last segment I want to touch on is when you are looking at development of talent. There are people in different grades of performance, and then there are people in different grades of potential.
Mhm.
What should be the development strategy for people in, let's imagine, low, medium, high, and let's leave the lows out for both the conversations. So the medium and the high performers and medium and the high potential people. What should be the development strategy for them? And should it be the same? Should it be different?
It should be different. And this is kind of put your money where your mouth is, right? The purpose of identifying those high potentials is to strategically invest more in them with the more expensive and right tools. So while I spoke a lot about mobility of jobs, that's one, there's also coaching. There's also these leadership development programs you may want to send people to, which are more expensive. So what we say is reserve the funds to strategically do it on those high potentials, and take the high performers or not necessarily high potentials and also invest in them. But again, more money should be spent on them versus some money being spent. Because again, if I have $100 and I say you have this as your budget for learning and development, then how are you going to distribute it across your high potential programs, which will suck up a lot versus the average others. Now, this is also where organizations struggle, because now suddenly you are very visibly calling out where someone's going to a Harvard and you're not, and you're both VPs. That message is so hard that I've often seen organizations buckle and say, "Oh, no, we'll do the program for everybody," and then you don't have more money because the population is higher, and then the program often fizzles out. So that's why I say kind of put your money where your mouth is a stronger statement to say, if you want to do it well, it calls for some of these bold measures and calling out and being visible with some of these things. Are you ready for it? If not, and you want to not rock the boat, you can still, give them smaller things on the side and rotational moves, but you're not differentiating on the development or giving anybody coaching.
Cannot have great talent management practices if the average people manager is not trained adequately. And therefore they understand what is the differentiation, where do you coach, where do you let go, where do you tolerate the failure, so these are all judgment calls, and therefore investing in building the people manager capability in doing this becomes a very important part of the success. And therefore then they have the courage to turn back and say, well, that person is being considered for a different position, and hence the investment in going in for this, rather than to say, don't worry about it, we'll send it to you next month. So I think that's the real courage. Tonushree, it's been absolutely delightful to sort of really, dive deep into your ideas about talent management. And there's so much that I learned from, in the way that you framed it. I mean, that's really so good. Thank you so much for being there on the show. And I can assure you that, we are going to have to talk to you again about a different set of aspects of talent management. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.